Hello and welcome to Space Engineers. My name is Dominic Falcon, and today we are going to cover a truly scary topic when it comes to playing Space Engineers, truly appropriate for Halloween. And that topic is inventory and container management. Ugh, I'm getting the shivers just thinking about it here. So, when it comes to inventory management in Space Engineers, you really have a couple of options. The main option that most people kind of end up doing by default for a little while is going in and managing everything manually. So they'll run up to a cargo container here. They will come over and they will start just dragging things around, moving things into and out of containers, and that's just not much fun. I got to be honest with you, it gets really tedious, especially when you start adding in a lot of extra components and everything else. Now, if you like to stick within the game and don't like to use scripts and whatnot, the next best thing that's available to you is using these sorting blocks. And so what you do is you create a network. I'm going to go ahead and take my mining ship, hook it up to a connector, and then set up this sorting block in order to direct the flow of ore into this container here. And then from there, that ore is going to be able to be pulled into a refinery, and then the ignits that are formed out of that are going to be pushed into this container here. At which point the assembler will be able to grab ignits and build your components, and they have a final sorting block that pushes all those finished components into this container here. Now, this works, and if I go ahead and have a look at these sorting blocks very quickly, you can see how I'm doing this. So conveyor sorter, it is set to whitelist, in this case ore and components. My thought is if you have a grinder ship, you would want to be able to hook up to this and have all those components that you've just ground down sucked out and put back into your system. So it's going to whitelist these and it's going to drain all. Now again, drain all, what it does is it takes everything on this side of the sorting block and pushes it to that side of the sorting block. So then this container will end up getting filled up with ore and components. And it's going to just keep on going down the line here. And if we look at this particular sorting block here, we will see that the whitelist is set for ignits and components. Again, pushing the components down the line. And by the end of it, we're going to end up with a sorting block here whose only purpose is to push components into this final container. Now, this does work. If we go ahead and jump into our mining ship here and complete the docking procedure, we will see that our cargo container has been emptied and all of that iron that was in here has been pushed into the refinery. Now, if you see here, you can actually see that those ignits that are being generated are being pushed into this large cargo container here. So let's see if we can see that in action right over here. So here we should see ignits. Look at that thing of beauty. And then if we want to go ahead and turn on our assembler and let's make some steel plates out of that, so we'll go to production and we'll queue up 100 steel plates. That's a shift left click, by the way, in order to do that. A control left click will queue up 10. Now you can see the assembler is working, and it is going through our queue of things to be built. However, the plates are not sticking around in the inventory. They are being pulled into this container right here. The building's done. We have 110 steel plates. So, all in all, this actually works relatively well. You know, the ore comes in, it's automatically put into a container. It's routed, the ignits that come out of the refinery are routed into the assembler, and the output from the assembler is routed into this container here. So it's a step forward. However, you still have to go in, you still have to specify what ore do I want my refinery working on. And so you have to come into the refinery itself and be moving around the different ores in order to get it to process what you want it to be processing. And then when you want to actually produce something, you have to come in here and you have to either choose the components individually, or you have to come over into these small and large blocks ones and go, you know, I want everything that I need in order to make blast doors. Great. Click on that once, it queues up stuff to make a blast door component. That's good. That's progress. But this list tends to fill up, especially as you start running more and more mods. The list just gets huge, and you can't find anything. You can't search through this, so it's just kind of a pain in the butt. And it bothers me. I don't like it as much, but it works, and it's a good intermediate solution. So, what is my preferred solution? My preferred solution is Tim. Alright, so the first thing that we really need to do is we need to talk about, okay, what is Tim? Tim is a script. It is a script that somebody wrote. They put it up on the Steam Workshop, and they made it available for all the rest of us to pretty close to make inventory management disappear. So, okay, so the first question is, how do we set up Tim? Okay, I'm glad you asked. Aren't you glad you asked? I'm glad you asked. So we'll go into our programmable block. We already have one placed down ahead of time. And we're going to go in and we're going to hit edit. Now that brings us up to the basic code editor. Don't need any of this. What I want to do is I want to browse the workshop. Now these are scripts that I have already subscribed to from the workshop, and Tim is actually Taleden's inventory manager. Thank you, Taleden. We all owe you a debt of gratitude and a lot of hours of labor. So what we do is we select Taleden's inventory manager on this script screen here, and we hit OK. Boom. It automatically populates the editor for us. So all of that code that makes this work is now in here. If you want to learn about scripting and all that kind of stuff, the best way to do it is to take something that's already there and work on it. Now, if you want to do that, the first thing I'm going to point out is all these functions have had their white space removed. It's going to make it hard to read. However, if you can copy all this out of here, and you can just you put your cursor in here, you hit Control A, Control C, and then you can actually just go ahead and go into Visual Studio. It's a great choice for editing C# code, and it can do the formatting for you, so you can actually go, okay, this is what it should look like. So I think it's pretty darn impressive, honestly. I think it's really good. So some of the configuration, you have different ways to do it. One of which is you can do that via the editor right here. So inside the code, you can actually see all of these are different quotas for creating different objects within the game. Now, one way that you can do it is you can actually go in here and you can change these values inside the code editor, and then go in, remember and exit, and then the next time that Tim runs, it will have an updated inventory, updated quotas. So you can actually say, okay, well, I want it to do this and this. Or you can say, I'm on Earth, I don't need any thruster components, so I'm going to go ahead and remove them. And you can just go in here, you can edit this, you can come down, you can find thrust components, and you can set this to 0. My preferred method is to go ahead and do this through a LCD screen, but we'll show that here in a few moments. So now the programmable block has Tim installed in it. That's part 1. Part 2 is to use a timer block, and again, here's one that I prepared before the show. So we're going to come into this timer block. We're going to set the delay. We're going to leave the delay at about 10 seconds. Tim works absolutely fine on a delay of 5 to 10 seconds. So we're going to set it silent. We're going to set up the actions. And the first action is going to be our Tim programmable block. We're going to run it with the default argument. And then we're going to call our timer block with a start. Now this will simply start the timer, and this creates a loop. So every time this timer fires, it's going to run the Tim script, and then it's going to start the timer again to run the Tim script again in 10 seconds. This is pretty standard stuff when it comes to actually running any kind of in-game script. They all want to be called on a regular basis. Tim is a little more forgiving in this regard. You don't have to run it every second or every tick. Some of the scripts do want you to do that. So you just run it every 5 to 10 seconds, let it do its thing. So now that we have the timer programmed, so it has its time, it's set to silent, it has its actions, we're going to go ahead and trigger it now. And so now, Tim has started running. And so if you look at this over here, you can actually see, when was Tim last run? How long did it take? How many instructions did it complete? This is all, some of this isn't as useful for you, but you can tell, yes, it is actually running and it is actually working. So it's not Tim. Alright, so the first thing that we need to do in order to make Tim function is we need to start adding tags to our containers, to our assemblers, to our refineries, everything, to make them be controlled by Tim. So let's go ahead and start here. We're going to start with the refinery, and we're going to tag it, and it's simply going to say Tim Auto. This means that Tim is going to automatically control our refinery for us. So Tim is going to decide, according to its quotas, what ore needs to be refined to provide to meet the quotas. So refinery, Tim Auto, great. Let's come on over here to our assembler, and we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to simply add a left square bracket, Tim Auto, close that off, and now Tim is going to be managing the assembler as well to handle quotas. Pretty cool stuff. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and configure our containers. So this container here is our ore container. So we're going to come in and we're going to tag this. We're going to say Tim ore :P1 close bracket. What does that even mean? What it means is Tim is going to be managing this container. It's going to store ore with a priority of 1. So again, Tim is going to take any ore that's in the system and it's going to put it into this container first because it has the highest priority. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing now with this container right here. We're going to come in and we're going to add the tag Tim Ignits priority 1. Now all of our ignits are when they're generated or however they happen to enter the system, that's something that's kind of nice. They can come in from any direction. If you use your assembler and you actually deconstruct some stuff and you create some ignits, in the previous system, those ignits are just going to stick around in the assembler. Nothing's going to happen to them. In this system, however, they're going to be pulled out of the assembler and put back into this container. And then finally, our last container here, we're going to have this store our components. And you can actually use just about any spelling of components or of the different things, so long as they are unique enough for Tim to identify. And how can you tell if Tim has picked it up and it's correct? Well, it'll correctly capitalize it in the name here. So you can see that it filled it all out. It makes Tim kind of nice in that regard. Oh, it looks like I misspelled ignit. So INGOT. And we'll watch for Tim to rename it. There we go. Tim is now properly configured. Ooh, glad we got that sorted out. Okay, so now Tim is managing all of these. Now I can go ahead and dump the ore in, and so you could see that it's actually doing the whole thing. There's something else that I want to do first. There's actually two things, and they both involve this array of LCDs that I have up front here. So we're going to go to this LCD first, this little small one, and it's going to be, we're going to add Tim quota to this panel. Now, when Tim runs again, we'll give it a few moments here, it's going to actually populate, if I did it correctly, it's actually going to populate all of the quotas for Tim. Come on, Tim. You can do it. Ah, wrong brackets. I hate it when I do that. So, square brackets on both sides, Tim quota. Now, we have a panel devoted to the quota. Now, if we come up to this panel and we hit F, we can go in and we can edit this. And since we're on a planet, we're going to say, never try to create any thrusters. So we're going to come in, we're going to say minimum quantity of 0 and 0%. And that's going to stay there, and it'll actually correct the, corrected the indentation there. And now Tim knows, don't create any thrusters at all. Okay. So now we're going to come into this panel here, and we're going to turn it into a inventory panel. So Tim inventory components, or INGOTS. We'll spell Ignatz correctly this time. And we're going to add a span. So we're going to go span : 1, 2. 1 wide, 2 high. We'll go ahead and close this off, exit out, and wait for Tim to run again. Okay. See, I'm learning something new here. Alright. So if we look at this here, we can actually see what is in our inventory when it comes to components and when it comes to our ingots and our ore. So nothing's in here right now. So let's put on our boost here a little bit. So this assembler, there's a column here for assembler. The 1 indicates that there's one assembler attempting to work on it. The bang means that it can't. It's unable to actually fulfill this. Now, all these dashes that you see in here are other things that Taleden has attempted to make and has failed at making because it doesn't have the objects in there. And so anything here that you have a quota on, Tim is going to try to make, and if it can't, it's going to step back and say, I can't make this, and it's going to set it aside for a little bit, and then it'll go on to try to make something else. And you can see a similar thing down here in the refinery, where it'll actually say what the refinery is currently working on in order to fulfill this quota. So now that we've set up our quotas, we have an inventory management screen. Let's go ahead and connect our miner with its load of iron. So we'll go ahead and park. We will jump out. And let's watch this on Tim's screen. So, iron. Look at all of that iron that has been loaded into the system. And we can see now that there's a refinery working on chewing up that iron. And we can see right here on the inventory screen, there is uranium in the ship. And so Tim is now managing that ship as well and says, okay, we have all that uranium. And we can see now that we are producing iron ingots, and we are close to our quota. And we should start seeing here shortly that the refinery, having access to those iron ingots, has started actually creating those objects. So we now have 5 small tubes. Now, there isn't the components for the computer, so the computer is going to fail, but it's going to come back and it's going to keep cycling through these and seeing what it can make. And it's going to bring these quotas up, or it's going to bring the quantity that you have in your storage up to these values at some point. So if we come over here right now, we're going to see we have steel tubes. And we're actually also going to see in this one here that we have iron. And so that's kind of a quick tutorial on how to use TIM. So the target percentage is in relation to each other. So if I were to come in and start requesting more steel plates, either through direct quotas on the various containers themselves, these percentages are going to increase everything else proportionately. So if I want to keep, 1,000, if I come in here and I say, all right, I actually need 1,000 steel plate on hand at all times. Well, these other quotas are going to end up coming up as well. So it's just kind of a good way to keep everything in balance. If you have 1,000 steel plate, you're going to need, so much interior plate and so many gravity gen components and so many, all these different objects. And those are all based on, I believe Taleden says he bases them on the red and blue starter ships that you can obtain. And so, and that's for the default percentages. You can, of course, modify those percentages as you see fit. So yeah. So that's kind of a quick overview on TIM. And I would go ahead and point out that since the assembler is going to try to make all these different items, and if it fails, it'll just come back later, you can leave your thrusters in there, and TIM will burn some assembly cycles trying to make that item, but if it can't, it's not going to, freak out and gum up the entire works for everything. So, and then the other place where this can actually be kind of useful as well is you can say, well, I also need to have a certain amount of different ammunition types. And I want to make sure that I always have at least one angle grinder in storage. And so you just come in here and you change those queues. And you can also go in and you can say, I want to be sure to keep in a certain number of oxygen bottles and a certain number of hydrogen bottles. Now, I am going to go ahead and point out one thing that might not make immediate sense. So you can actually come in and you can specify your quotas here and say, I need to have 1,000 steel plates. You can specify that here, or you can specify it on individual machines. So for example, and this is my favorite use of TIM, I can come in to this reactor here. Well, maybe I can. If I can find a control port, I can't. Alright, we're going into the cockpit. We're going to pull up our reactor. So there's our large reactor. Oh, I copied this in from a place where TIM already has been configured with uranium. And so has already been configured for the ship. And so on the reactor I said TIM uranium 10. Now, because I've done that, TIM gets a quota of, okay, well, we need to keep at least 10 uranium in this system. And so anytime that it actually ends up getting uranium, or it has uranium ignits in storage, because you will notice that the uranium is in my large reactor. Let's go to inventory. And even though this is an ingot, it has not been pulled into the cargo container that is supposed to have ingots. And that's because I've specified that my ship needs to have at least 10. So every time I connect up, this ship is automatically refueled. How cool is that? And you can do that with any number of different ships. You can even set up your base reactor. In fact, let's go ahead and do that right now. So we'll go ahead and grab a large reactor, and we will hook it up directly. And we're going to come in here and we're going to say Tim uranium 10. Now, Tim doesn't have any uranium, so let's go ahead and we're going to go and pretend we're doing some mining. So we're going to hop into our ship here. We're going to undock the ship. So we're technically disconnected from the station now. And we're going to pull up the creative tools in order to spawn some objects in. And I believe that is Alt F10. Oh, look at that. That is so not the one. That's a Space Master. Let's do Control F10. That's not it either. Shift F10. Beautiful. Spawn menu. We're going to spawn some uranium ore. And we're going to spawn, let's say, 10,000 kilograms of it. And we're going to spawn it into this container. So you'll notice 10,000 ore. When Tim runs, which should be here in just a moment. Go on, Tim. Oh, never mind. I forgot to redock the ship. Oh boy. Okay. We're back from mining. Alrighty. Let's dock the ship. Great. And there it goes. That uranium has now been moved. And you also may have noticed that the uranium was split between my ship and this large reactor. So this large reactor now has about five ingots, blah, cannot talk today, 5 ingots of ore. You will also see that our quota for uranium ingots is now 20. And the refinery is now working on building more uranium ingots. And based off of that building, you can see it's building them up here, and that uranium is being pulled into R2 reactors. And so Tim will keep going until we have 20 uranium. It's going to split it between that reactor, the base reactor there, and the ship reactor there, and then it'll move on to something else. So, I hope that this has been informational. I hope that it's given you an idea of where to start with Tim, and once again, I am going to point you very firmly at pulling up the Taleden's Inventory Manager Guide, because I couldn't cover everything that Tim is capable of. There's a lot, and it is godsend. I absolutely love this. I would not want to change this for anything else. And that's it. Anytime I get a cargo system set up, I'm always implementing Tim. I don't always have, one cargo container for each type, but I do when I get on the larger bases, just so that I can have larger counts of the various ingots and have a lot of ore backed up and ready for processing. So you can see, and it lets me kind of take a look at this and go, okay, what am I short on for ingots? Is that just because the refinery is behind? Because I've got plenty of uranium ore. I don't have enough ingots. Well, that's because I only have one refinery and it's currently working on it, trying to get those numbers up. And I can look up here and I can tell the same things. I can say, oh, this isn't processing. Why is that? Oh, it's because I don't have cobalt and everything else. And you can see that down here. I have 0 cobalt. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah, so that's it. Tim's Inventory Manager. Use it, love it, read the guide. You will not regret it. So I want to go ahead and thank you for taking your time to listen to me. And I hope that you are able to use Tim to make your life in Space Engineers Survival that much better. Thank you again. My name is Dominic Falcon, and I hope that you have a great day.